To you, what's the difference, Allan, between closing and selling?
I detest the word closing. If you approach a sales conversation, a sales meeting, with the only objective is to sell the customer, to make that sale, you will be a very mediocre salesperson. You have to approach every sales interaction with the thought of, I'm going to help this customer, I'm going to serve this customer. So closing to me is coercive, it's conquering, because sales meetings treat customers like prey. Like, I got them sons of bitches, I got them, I closed Mr. and Mrs. Smith last night. It took me 3 hours, but I finally got them. It's like, I won the war. Sales is not a war. It should be like, you know what? I helped Mr. and Mrs. Smith last night get the windows that they really wanted for their house. It's a mindset, it's a simple shift, but stop closing and start helping and you'll sell more. It's as simple as that.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Leads to Deals podcast, where we talk about everything from leads to deals, and everything that we talk about leads to deals. I'm super stoked, super excited, even a little anxious, right, to go kind of sales chops toe to toe with our next guest. He's a best-selling author. He is one of the dominators in this space when you talk about sales training. His coaching course and his books, The 7 Secrets of Sales. And I got to just tell you, it's tremendous content. So I wanted to welcome you, Allan Langer, to the Leads to Deals podcast, brother. Thanks for showing up.
Scott, man, it's great to be here. I'm very excited to chat with you and be on the show.
Cool, man. I appreciate it. I want to let people know, I think it's always important that people understand where the sum of your experience comes from. And so it's not just because I know that you can shortcut, but you had to go through so much to have this knowledge and to have this information. So can you kind of give me the high level overview? Hey, this is where I started in sales, and then this is where I began this coaching?
Yeah, I mean, my journey in sales is approaching 27 years. And what I learned, and I'm glad I was, self-aware enough to learn this, is most of the sales training out there is product training. And there's very little sales training. And then when you get into the sales training, it goes back to the typical schwarmy, always be closing, decades old tactics of high pressure and doing strategies and techniques that try to get people to do something that they don't feel comfortable doing. Yeah. And once I realized that produces 20 to 25% closing rates, I realized I need to do something else. So I started doing my own research, and I just wound up on, how does the brain work? What's the psychology of actual sales? And the first guy that I saw that was actually looking into that was Zig Ziglar, and I started looking into a lot of his stuff. But it's just this is how the brain works. So why aren't we actually working toward how the brain receives things and feels comfortable, rather than setting up these sales resistance sentences and pitches and things like that? So I started doing my own research and came up with my own philosophies, and here I am today.
Yeah, it's so funny because one of my first questions, what's the most controversial view you have on sales, right? And damn sure if you didn't open up with the schwarmy ABC, I said, oh, God, is he going to stab me in the heart here? I think we're going to end up getting on the same page. But I remember my first business partner, I bought him a 4 foot by 3 foot wide, 3 letters birthday cake that was just ABC on it.
Right.
But you said something about Zig Ziglar, and it's so funny. I could tell as I was doing my diligence on you, I felt through watching your communication style, and then the quality, and what our listeners really want to stick to this podcast is how you do this ethical, high velocity, high closing rate sales. And I say, I bet you, in my head, I said, I bet you Zig Ziglar had a monster impact on him as well too. So can you tell me about that? When was the first time you heard Zig, and if he in fact kind of had some influence in your mind?
Well, he was, as I started researching, I remember the first guy I listened to, and it's funny now that I think back on it, that I kind of took some stuff from this guy, but it was Tom Hopkins. And Tom Hopkins was also he was an old school seller, and he had so many bad techniques that I look at it now. But back then in the 80s and 90s, it worked. It was the stuff that, you didn't have information. Your customers weren't nearly as prepared as they are today. So I remember once he said, I was at a conference of his, or a talk, and he said, I walk into a house and the first thing I do is put the contract on the table with a pen on it before I open my mouth. And imagine if you did that today. It's that's the old school kind of stuff. Yeah. So But I kind of evolved, and yeah, Zig really resonated with me because he was more about the psychology and the emotion of sales. It comes down to emotion, and I don't care what you're selling. A human being is behind making the decision, and every human being has emotion. And that's when I started realizing I need to sell with emotion rather than sell with features and benefits.
Yeah, and I know we'll cover a lot in today's pod, but Zig really made me feel good for the first time ever about sales.
Great point.
You know, I've been brainwashed, and as I started listening to his content, and he tells this, story about like nothing gets done unless there's a salesman. Nothing is bought without a salesman. And he talks about like the tractor, and then the guy who sells the tractor, and then the farmland. And just like literally when you stop and pause and you think, you're like, wait a minute, nothing that I have, this was sold by somebody who pitched the idea, and then the store bought it, and then this was, and like literally everything is by sales. And he gave me the confidence that, hey, I can do something that's a dirty industry, but I can do it ethically, and I can feel good about it. And that's what gave me the comfortability to say, oh, I can make a career out of this.
Yeah. And I even have this in my book. It's like so many salespeople feel bad about selling because they're like conditioned to feel like salespeople are scumbags. And it's actually a very noble profession if you do it the right way. And, I want people to know that it's okay to be a salesperson. Like, when you ask a 10-year-old, what do they want to be when they grow up? They never say salesperson. They say policeman or whatever, or lawyer, doctor. Yeah. They should be saying, I want to be a salesperson because I can make a lot of money and help a lot of people. And that's kind of how I lead this.
So how bad did you suck at sales in the beginning? I mean, let's go back. Right?
I sucked. My very first sales job, I sold sunrooms. We were tasked. We went out. And we were told we had to sell a sunroom. Back then, it was probably between $30,000 and $60,000. You had 2 hours in a house to sell a sunroom. And if you didn't do it, you lost the lead. You didn't get the customer. You couldn't follow up. It's just one or done. You didn't sell it. The national closing average of that company back then, ready for this? National average was 16%. 16 out of 100 people said yes, and they thought that was a good rate. I wanted to jump off a bridge when 84 people were telling me no, every month. So that's when that experience of walking in, we were trained to walk in and show the product, show the screws, show the rollers, show the glass, show the roof. I can still tell you, I have PTSD from learning from that sales training. Yeah. But the day I walked in and said, I left all my bags in the car and I went out to the back deck with this older couple, and they said, listen, we love our deck, but we can only use it a couple months a year. It's too hot in the summer. We can't come out here in the winter. And all I did was stand there for a second, and I said, wow, imagine sitting here on a beautiful December day as the snow's coming down in your warm sunroom looking at deer walking through your backyard. And the woman's knees buckled. She punched her husband in the arm, and she said, that's what I want. And that's the day I realized emotion sells, products don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. We have a kind of a similar start to our sales journey. So when 22 years ago, I started what was considered like high ticket sales. I didn't know. What happened is the day before I turned 21, the week or so, the days leading up to me turning 21, I was installing security alarms, Allan. Mm-hmm. And so I would go into these businesses, but I was somebody who liked to talk and I could communicate with people. So they always made me go show the guys how to like program in the codes, and here's how you work it. We did this business, and I walked into this business. There was nothing but young guys in suits and BMWs and really nice cars outside. And I'm just programming and I'm teaching this guy. And I'm like, hey, man, do you mind if I ask, like, what do you guys do here? He's like, we sell timeshare. I'm like, what's timeshare? And then I was like, I don't know what you guys do, but I want to do it. But that was that also. So I immediately, literally went home, quit, said, boom, I'll be there at the sales track the next day. And I was terrible in the beginning. I share it with my team here. I literally just told them the story. I was fired from my first one. It didn't work out. The second track I went to ended up really starting a really good journey. But that was also that today only. There is no be back bust. There's no, what I learned is like you learned is that ultimately that's not the final solution, but that backbone of being able to obtain the opportunity if it presents itself that day. Like I rarely miss out on closing somebody in that first day because I know that it's expected, because that was the DNA. I also know now how to let go and release some pressure and come back. But I really feel so thankful for that opportunity to have worked in that grimy, must close now or die type mentality to be able to soften it up with the ages.
Yeah, it's like putting a stone in one of those grinders where it smooths it out, because you're so right. Because I still tell all the reps I coach today, the best time, the most opportunistic time to sell a customer is on that initial visit. But it
Yes.
doesn't have to be a high pressure initial visit, because that's when they are most excited. That's when they have the most information. The second you walk out the door, the second you leave that meeting, they're not thinking about you anymore. You just become a commodity. You just become a number. But when you're in
Yes.
front of them and they're excited and the ether's in the air and they're like, yeah, I want to do this, and you can do it the right way without the pressure, that's when you not only sell more, but that's when you get referrals. That's when you feel good about yourself. That's when sales is fun.
It's funny because you got to have a good product that you believe in.
Of
I
course.
think that there's a lot of people out there that they never get to truly level up, even whether through training or on their own journey that people would naturally have. If you just stuck to one thing, making pizzas for 20 years, you're going to be better. And it's almost like having better quality dough. When you believe in the product, you have such more a conveyance of emotions and the ability to not sound like a salesman and not to feel like you're reading a script. Because if I can make that person believe how I believe about this product, we're going to get a sale. We don't even have to close. It will be a sale. And
Yes.
so that's why I love having good products.
Yeah. I mean, and good products lead to good tonality, leads to good excitement, leads to energy. People can tell right away if you don't believe in the product or if you just think the product is average. But there was a guy I used to work with when I sold Anderson windows. He was one of the top reps there as well. And he always would crack me up because the Anderson window we sold was the most expensive window on the market, like 50% more than any other window. And he would put down a price, let's say $70,000 for a house full of windows. And instead of like most reps, so that they're like scared, like, oh, okay, it's 70, like I'm scared of the price. He would plop that on the table. He goes, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, that's a deal. Right there, that's a deal. Like for these windows, you can't get a better price. And he had so much excitement about his product. It was awesome to watch.
We had this one guy on one of my sales tracks, and his famous lines, it's not a lot of money, it's not a big deal. And every single time that they would talk about the price, he would anchor with that statement. And he was also one of those really good guys that like neurological, and they taught this at that original track as well too, where like we were face to face at that time, not over the phone. And you would just constantly see this little micro head nod and like, it's not a lot of money. It's not a big deal. Not a lot of money. It's not a big deal. And then all of a sudden it's like 14,000 down or whatever the price may be. So there's a lot to it, man. That's why I liked your book. One of the things that your title of the book, I think, The Ultimate Guide to Reinventing Your Sales Life. So the full is the 7 secrets to selling more by selling less.
Mm-hmm.
So we can unpack that. But I want to talk about the ultimate guide to reinventing, that reinventing part. Sales is one of these industries that I think people, if they get burnt out, they can still make enough to pay the bills, but they almost are like lifeless characters stuck in this role. And when I see them, it hurts my soul because I know how much potential is behind that opportunity. And so, you've done sales training. I've never had that opportunity. How hard is it to truly reinvent somebody, to teach an old dog these new tricks? What is that like to go talk to a guy who's your age, who's been selling cars, who hasn't made it above 80,000 for the past 17 years and is just accustomed?
So I'm going to answer that 2 ways. The first way is a lot of that is the byproduct and the cause of really poor sales management, sales leadership. I think one of the biggest problem in sales today is reps make so many mistakes to begin with, but it comes from bad training and bad leadership. And when leadership is making you feel pressure, is making you not love your product, is making you have a job that becomes mundane, then you become the sales robot and you start accepting the $80,000 a year salary. So that's number one. Number two, when I get hired by companies to come in, and I actually enjoy this so much. I'll go in and do, let's say, 3 days of training, and let's say there's 20 salespeople there. There's always going to be 2 or 3 of those guys you just mentioned. They've been selling for 30 years. They're pissed that they're there. What am I going to learn? And I always start my sales training with mindset. And if I can get them to switch their mindset and show that this is what you actually can do if you change your mindset and take that 80,000 and double it next year, then they become excited. And almost 99.9% of the time, I turn those guys around because they go in there thinking I'm not going to learn anything. And then they realize I might, and then it changes everything.
I literally, and I got to be careful because I'm thinking of the things I want to say.
Sure.
And I see a guy like you, and I felt your advice, and I said, well, wait a minute, maybe it's just how I'm resonating with him. Let me go to his Amazon book reviews. And buddy, I was reading these people talked about you the exact same way I was feeling about you, the exact same way those guys in there feel. It's like, hey, you're like this like friend on the inside. You're not trying to say 10x this and scream this and Lambo this and just do this. You're not screaming at these guys. You're a beta male. You're literally giving them actionable strategies that are different than what they're doing currently. But also, how do you gain attention? In other words, you're up against, as a coach, all these other guys who are less substance and more flash, which is now just a better version of that old thing that we're trying to break from. So how do you struggle? What do you go against it?
I look at all that stuff as, on social media. There's so many sales trainers and marketers, and all of a sudden you can be making $5,000 a day and all this stuff, and these all shiny objects. And I get a lot of clients unfortunately from people who've tried it. They've tried 3 or 4 or 5 of these things, and it doesn't work. And they're like, "This is why it doesn't work." And this guy resonates a little more because I just try to be authentic and real. And the other thing is even though my niche is in-home sales, like I train contractors and companies like that, the concept of leading with helping and not selling resonates with a lot of people. And it also makes sales reps feel like that's what I want to do. I don't want to go in and just try to sell people. I really want to help them, but they're not trained that way. So it's almost like it's going against how they've been trained. So it takes a little while, and it's just a matter of all of these. I always say, when you see someone online saying you can make $5,000 a day, then why are they online selling that? I mean, if they're making $5,000 a day, they probably don't need to be online to sell these courses. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that just hearing you say that, there's a couple of different things. I'm in the REI world, the real estate investment world, right?
Yeah.
And I'm newer to this over the past 4 years. And one of the reasons why I elected to get into this, Allan, is because I said, okay, I heard about the industry. That's cool. Let me go to a couple of AdWords websites. Let me go look at what the competitors are doing. And Allan, I'm telling you, I filled out form after form after form after form after form of maybe half of the people that actually called me back within 2 days. Not a single one had any structure to their consultation whatsoever, not even a framework. Wow. And then the quality of conversation was so minute that I said, oh my God, these guys are order takers. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And so then I think about a guy like you. It's like, man, it's almost like if you're if you can be a hobbyist and still pay your bills by being an order taker. In other words, this model is such that you don't have to actually be good at sales to be able to at least pay your bills. You're not going to be a rock star, but you can, that's really difficult too. That's a different side of that difficulty, where these people have no foundation and they don't even appreciate what it could mean to them if they actually had sales skills.
Right. And here's the thing. If you can't get better unless you want to get better. Like when I give a training, like I just finished a series of 20 different trainings. It was 4 weeks of 5 trainings each up at the single company up in Cape Cod. Great group of people. But my thing that I wanted them to walk out of there with is, let's talk about your takeaways from each of these trainings. But then takeaways are great. You can write your takeaways in a notebook. You can put them in your phone. But if you don't do anything about them, if you don't implement what you learned, it means nothing. A statistic I always go back to is, did you know 94% of self-help books and programs are never completed? 94%. Yeah. So why is that $1 billion industry every single year? Because people keep buying the same damn books and they never finish them. Nobody wants, only 6% of the people that actually buy self-help materials and courses and books actually finish them and get better. So you can listen to me until you're blue in the face. You can take all my trainings and workshops. If you don't do anything about it, I can't help you. And there's at some point you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, it's a humbling to hear you say that. I had a conversation with my team. I really feel like I built something special here. It's nowhere near where it's going. So it just means we have tons of room for improvement here on the sales floor that I have outside of this podcast studio. But one of the things that really hurts is I've created such a good culture, but nowhere near where I thought it would be, to the point where one day I brought in like chunks, libraries full of sales books and self-help books and everything. It's all, I don't read any fiction. I just have a monster home library. And then I hyped everybody up, and we had a checkout system and turned them in. And then the other day I just looked, and almost every book was back in the thing. And I said, damn.
Yeah.
It's like, we can talk a good game, but I'll never want you to be more wealthy than you should want. Like, I should be pushing you, but you have to be in the lead. But if I provide you these resources and it's not worth it to you between calls or at night or whatever to invest in yourself, like you said, it's the information's there. You just got to actually act on it.
Right. And that's why, and it's human nature. Human nature is obviously everything we do. And it's like, human nature, people default to doing easy things rather than hard. People default to negativity. The brain actually defaults to negativity 83% of the time. So it's easy to do these things, to not get better, to complain. It's easy to have a fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset.
Yeah.
All these things are easy because that's the way the mind is built. For survival, it's easy to survive when you kind of just sit back and relax and kind of float through life. But it's that 6% of people who don't do that become really successful.
Yeah. And some of the background research we were doing and going to some of your trainings and stuff, you say this word, ditch the pitch.
Yes.
And I wanted to dive into that because to me, that's controversial. Like because I want to hear you say it, and then I'll tell you why. What do you mean when you say ditch the pitch?
What I mean is, and this is actually, it was recently backed up by a fascinating study, but ditch the pitch is when you do a sales pitch, when you are trained to do a pitch, the problem is sales reps try to follow a script. Okay. We've all heard it. We've all seen it in person. They try to follow a script. They try to follow almost an ABC process, a word by word process. Once that's done, their sales resistance, the walls go up. But the recent study has shown that, especially with millennials and newer generations, like, 50 years and younger, 45 years and younger, as soon as their brain detects any type of pitch, they automatically shut down psychologically. They stop listening to you. Older generations are more receptive to pitches because they're used to that their whole lives, and they're not used to living online like the newer generations are.
Yeah. So
when I say ditch the pitch, I mean that people don't want to hear anything that sounds like a sales pitch. Now, here's the thing, and here's the controversial part, or the pushback I get from this sometimes is, well, you need a process, you need a pitch. That is true. You do need a process, you do need a pitch, but you have to learn that to the point where it becomes so conversational out of your mouth that it doesn't sound like a pitch.
Yep.
The example I use is, who in this audience has ever watched a movie? Okay, everybody's watched a movie. Do you ever watch a movie saying, wow, they're reading from a script? No, they know the script so well and they act to the point where everything looks so natural. That's how you should act in a sales conversation. You should know what to cover. You should know how to answer questions. You should have the process in your brain, but it comes across so naturally because you do want to help the customer. Yeah. That's what I mean by ditch the pitch.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and I'll take it one step further. I used to love the movie The Boiler Room so much, and I still do. I love Boiler Room. I mean, I was so into it at 27 years old. I had a DVD player built into my little Acura, and I would watch that before I went on my sales pitches in the morning. I printed out the entire movie script, and this is what made me think of it. I printed out the entire movie script, and I just had it. Like I was Seth. Yeah. And anyways, but I remember reading that script and then watching the movie. And they would never be verbatim, but it would always be the essence. Occasionally, there's a couple of symptoms verbatim, but that's the point. It's like, hey, listen, here's this framework. Here's this guide, if you will, but you have to be yourself on top of it and being able to communicate smoothly. So it sounds like we're on the same page. It's not that you're saying, hey, you shouldn't have a structure. You shouldn't have a strategy. It's just that you shouldn't be so locked into these verbatim words that you sound like a robot or you can't be your authentic self on that sales call.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean, because if you sound like you're giving a pitch, then you're not going to make a sale. I mean, it's becoming more increasingly clear. Like, just go on LinkedIn now. Like, if you're on LinkedIn on a daily basis, I just did a post on this yesterday where there's so many AI bots and messages and sales messages coming across that driving people crazy on LinkedIn because it's not authentic. It's not a real person. And it's a pitch. And when you get the pitch, whether it's over the phone or someone coming to your house to sell your roofing or siding, or you going to sell copy, whatever it is, I call it the anti-salesperson. If you can become the anti-salesperson, the person that they're not expecting, the sales guy or saleswoman that they're expecting, if you're not that, you're halfway home. Because once you're not that person, they're like, oh my God, this is not the sales guy I was expecting. And then they start listening to you.
And it's so funny too, because if you look at some of the old heads who teach the scripts, they never were using them. Like any of my old school sales directors, sales managers, they'd be like, here's a script, make sure you follow this. And it'd be like an hour presentation, but they'd be locking up deals in 15 to 20 minutes doing their own thing. So it's like, I knew what was up. You're just putting the safety net around me so that way I don't break anything and we can at least be 1 out of 20. But I see you guys over there over that 1 out of 5, just saying what you want.
Right.
But it's interesting, man. The industry's changed a lot. I wanted to kind of hit these 2 words and have you tell me, to you, what's the difference, Allan, between closing and selling? If there is.
Oh, so I detest the word closing. This is in my book. And the very first secret in my book, the very first mindset, the foundation of everything I do is if you approach a sales conversation, a sales meeting, with the only objective is to sell the customer, to make that sale, you will be a very mediocre salesperson.
Amen.
You have to approach every sales interaction with the thought of, I'm going to help this customer, I'm going to serve this customer. And here's the big sentence, whether they buy from me or not. Okay. See, salespeople have this perception that, oh my God, if I don't sell this, well, screw them. I'm out of here. I'm never going to call them again. I wasted my time. Well, that means you're not leaving them with a great experience. If you leave a prospect with a great experience, whether they buy from you or not, guess what? They will refer you whether they buy from you or not. Yeah. Some of the greatest referrals I ever got was I'd go in like, you know what, your windows are great. I just can't afford them. They're too expensive, which I ran into a lot. But you know what? My mom can afford them. I'm going to call her for you. Now someone's referring me to their mother. I mean, you can't get a better referral than that. And they didn't buy from me. So closing to me is coercive. It's conquering. I joke, I think I wrote this in my book. I joke that if an alien came down from Mars and went to a hunting lodge meeting on a Tuesday night and a sales meeting on a Wednesday morning, the alien wouldn't know the difference. Because sales meetings treat customers like prey. Like, I got them sons of bitches. I got them. I closed Mr. and Mrs. Smith last night. It took me 3 hours, but I finally got them. It's like, I won the war. Sales is not a war. It should be like, you know what? I helped Mr. and Mrs. Smith last night get the windows that they really wanted for their house. It's a mindset. It's a simple shift, but stop closing and start helping and you'll sell more. It's as simple as that.
So many different ways I'll kind of tie it into. When I was young, I don't know where I heard this or if I came up with it on my own, but I was very young in sales. I was only commission only. Yeah, and so that to me was really the most important framework for the rest of my life. Like I wish I could do it today to these kids here, but culturally we can't. Not for me to benefit, although I feel that was the core suspicions, drivings of my bosses at that time was for their benefit, but it really just, it made me who I was at that moment to grow. And it made me, I came up with the saying CEO you. Like, I'm the CEO of myself, like you, Scott. You're the CEO. And so I treated every lead like I bought them myself, even though I didn't. And I think that's the thing that you get when you talk about closing versus selling is the people who will go on a pitch and then give up on that lead. It's really easy to do that when you didn't spend $362 for that lead. It's really easy to do that when you go back to that CRM.
Scott, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if you were the business owner, you wouldn't do that. And so it's just how do you get that maximum life cycle out of those leads and revenue?
Yeah, I go when I train specifically with the in-home selling world, I tell every rep, you got to treat this like your own business. If it's a roofing company, this is your roofing company. You're not just sitting back here like a lead baby sitting on a couch waiting for the leads to come in, not caring whether you sell it or not. This is your company and you should care about it. And you're right, commission only turns you. It can really turn you into a really good salesperson if you know how to train yourself and teach yourself and learn things. Or a lot of stress and people quit from that industry. Quite often it has a high turnover
Yeah.
rate because of commission only. So, but yeah, look, treating sales like your own business, if you work for someone else, is a huge mindset shift. Huge.
Yep. And I think there's another level I've learned to appreciate as I've now have my own sales guys and some sales closers. One of the things that I never cared about as I was a closer and even the DOS or director of sales at the last place I had before I started my own company is all I cared about is my agreed upon commission is what I got. I didn't ask for anything more and I wasn't going to accept anything less. But I never pocket watched the company. I didn't care. I had an agreement with you. I'm going to go out there and create my own destiny. If I can do whatever in sales, I'll create it. But there is that fine line too, where it's like, also you have to understand you're part of a machine. A lot of closers don't understand like, oh, I managed to sleep, but I made him X amount of dollars. You know how many years worth of exposure are wrapped into this company, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what I'm trying to help these kids understand. It's like, hey, we're going to give you the opportunity to learn and grow. And maybe you won't be with me forever. And I want you to make a crap ton of money while you're here. But this is still a business, and I have to protect the financials of this business at scale to keep everybody in the next little you to come in. And so that's one of these things I'm starting to deal with now as I add on more and more sales agents is the guys who are good but not greedy. Great, but not greedy.
Yeah. And the other thing I think is huge from a culture standpoint, and I think this is where the sales leadership always gets this wrong, is they almost make the salespeople compete with one another, which is kind of good because you like competition.
Yep.
But they're also a team to make the company, the high tides raise all boats. But you have to be, it's like a family, and you got to be happy for the guy who's selling, who was the number one rep that month, rather than mad at them or So if you have that culture of teamwork and family, while also making money for yourself, that's when you really have a successful sales organization. The sales organizations that make everyone compete against each other and get mad or, look at, oh, that guy's always at the top, I hate his guts, or he's a scumbag, or whatever it is, that's not going to get you a successful company. You're gonna spring a lot of leaks in that boat.
I remember, speaking of sales culture, I walked in to go do a podcast at a guy who's really, I enjoy. I like the guy a lot. I think he's a good human being, and I think he's a good sales coach. But where I thought, as soon as I walked in, immediately I was like, oh, wow. The sales culture, because he showed me the pit where his guys were in this room, in this really dark room, and, still within earshot. But it didn't have any of the hallmarks of anything that would make my job more enjoyable by doing one of the toughest things that I have to do, which is getting told no all day long to get to the yeses. And so I think sales culture is such a huge driver, like you said, whether it be that teamwork or the incentives, et cetera. So how often are you going into a business because you're like restaurant rescue and you're going in there and finding out all these broken things, or are you primarily going into successful that are trying to elevate? Like, walk me through what you see in sales cultures between the rescues and then the elevators.
That is a tremendous question because, and I learned this as I go, as you started your own business, you learn, you make mistakes and you kind of learn things. And the first thing I was like, well, I'm just going to go in, I'm going to train companies. Here's my sales, here's my 3 packages, I'm going to go and train. And what I learned very, very quickly is, you can't just go in and train sales without finding out how the company is run. So I started saying let's say I sold my 3-day sales training package. The first day wouldn't be training anymore. I changed it to, I call it the customer evaluation, a customer journey evaluation. And I would sit with the leadership and I'd probably spend 2 or 3 hours with them. And I'd ask them a million questions on how they get leads, what's the culture there? I'd have all the managers in the room. I needed to find that out before I even was able to train salespeople, because if that was broken, then training salespeople don't matter, because if the culture's broken, then it's a waste of time. But I got a lot of pushback. I'm like, I just want you to come in for sales training. I'm like, I'm not going to train your sales team unless I find out how you run your company. And then I'd find out like their websites were wrong. Their marketing was terrible. The customer service was beyond broken. And I'd find all these things out. And now I'm actually a business consultant who then happened to train sales 3 weeks later because I had to fix everything else. Here's a question I love asking business owners. I would say, who's the most important person in your company? And they would say, well, me or my sales team or my installation manager. And I'm like, nope. The most important person in your company is the one who picks up the phone. Whoever picks up the phone to set that appointment is the most important person in your company, because that's the person giving the initial perception of your company. And if he or she screws that up, the sale is 10 times harder to get. So I evolved from here's just my sales training to let me go in and look at your company overall. That will get me to now how do I train your sales team to match the culture that you've built?
Yeah, and the unfortunate part about culture a lot of times is it's driven by the CEO, and a lot of CEOs originally were the sales guys,
Yeah.
and then they had set it up, but now they've diluted it by handing it to somebody else who's diluted it, who's handed it to somebody else. And if you're not really protective of what it is that you've created, you can really lose track as a CEO of exactly what's happening on the sales culture
Mm-hmm.
side. And then you look up and everything's gone. Particularly, I don't, for what I have this other side business here, it's a call center business. But if somebody hasn't actually done the deals themselves, I really try not to, like somebody who's just a capital partner and they're like, hey, we want to hire you, because it's like, I don't want to babysit you, bro. Like, I
Yeah.
know what it's going to take to call these leads, and you have to have that tenacity and experience yourself, and with good sales cultures. But finalizing sales culture, what are some things that people can do to increase sales culture?
I don't want to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, but actually bringing in some outside voices, whether it's me or anyone else, the amount of the increase in just excitement and the culture that day when you bring someone else in is not only a second voice, because they don't want to listen to the sales manager or the VP of sales every week, all year long, but they also feel like, wow, the leadership here is actually bringing someone in here to help me succeed. And when you can position it where here's Scott coming in or here's Al coming in, and they're going to help you succeed, yes, that's going to ultimately help the company succeed. But if you position it like, we want you to have a really good family life, we want your personal life to be great by increasing your income, and we're bringing Allan to go over these 5 strategies today that's going to help you increase your income, they're going to feel great about you and your company. That alone will help your culture.
Yeah.
And then don't set up, again, going back to the competition. Competitions are great, but don't set it up in a way where people hate the people that win the contests. You gotta be. They have to be like your brothers and sisters who are successful, rather than feeling, admonish them. You want to feel good for them. So if you can build those 2 things, I think would be a huge advantage to help your culture.
Yeah, I love the idea of bringing somebody in who can give. Sometimes it's reminding people what they already know. And I think that's the
Yeah.
value of having trainers come in. It's like, oh, you know what? Yeah, I really should. And I did try that one time, and then I got that no, and I stopped trying it. Let me give it another shot, and going through it like that. One of my favorite things if I'm ever posed that similar question, and is really, I'm a big fan of extreme accountability. And I think a lot of CEOs and sales managers out there are either hide with the numbers, or they're not paying attention enough to the numbers, or we just haven't created this transparent environment where we are lifting the people up. We're acknowledging people who need to be lifted up. We're also acknowledging the people who are at the top, and being able to have this. I'm not a helicopter dad, but I'm literally here chiming in on these calls, and we're going through the numbers together because I'm that support system. Like, everybody on my track should know that the more money you make, like, I'm here to help grow you. But I have the psychology behind it, because the more you make, the more I make. And
Mm-hmm.
so if I can help you achieve and break every single goal that you have, then I'll achieve and break every single goal. And I know I can't do it without you. That's what I've worked really hard on, is to be very fair, like a sports team. Like, here's the numbers, here's the people that need help right now. At the beginning
Mm-hmm.
of the day, we bring up our top performers from the day before. They get their shot outs, and then we
Mm-hmm.
go into the rest of our meeting. And so acknowledging success when it happens, and not just like, just another day.
One of the things I did with one company that had a really bad sales culture, and they got rid of the manager before I got there, and the owner was like, can you help me with this? What can you do? Was they had a very top-heavy sales team. So they're like 5 guys making all the money, the other 5, whatever it was, maybe 10 and 10. So I said, okay, you're going to pair your top guy with your worst guy and go down the line. So one paired with 20, 2 paired with 19, and you're going to make them teams.
Brilliant.
And they're going to run appointments together. And this top guy is going to help the lower guy get better as a team. And all of a sudden it changed the entire culture, because the top guy didn't just care about himself anymore. He cared about helping this other person get better. And now the company was getting better overall because they were helping each other.
Great. I love it. That's a brilliant idea. I want to get tactical with you for a moment.
Sure.
Let's go over like handling objections. We talked a little bit about mindset and sales culture, et cetera, but how are you training people on objections? You said ditch the script, but we already know the 20 different scripts that the seller could possibly, or the customer could possibly give us. So how are we preparing for objections using the 7 secrets of sales?
All right. I want to answer that 2 ways. First of all, I'm going to say a statement. The easiest way to handle objections is to not get them in the first place.
Woo, you're speaking my language.
Okay. Once you're handling an objection, you screwed something up in the sales call. You missed something. Okay. Now, how do you not get objections in the first place? There's 2 ways that I train to do this. One, we're going to go back to the ABC. Another area where I get pushback, where ABC, every time I ask any salesperson, what does ABC stand for? They always say, always be closing, because that's what they've been trained. To me, ABC used to work, but now it's changed, because always be closing is inherently selfish. If you're always closing, you're always thinking about making the sale and talking about yourself. My ABC is always be checking. The more you check in on your customer to take their temperature on how they're feeling about the sales call, the less objections you will get, because that will weed out the objections simply because you asked them a question. Give you a quick example. I'm trying to sell you whatever it is, Scott. In the middle of the conversation, I'm like, you know what, Scott, let me pause here for a minute. How does everything sound so far? It is a stupid, simple question that sales reps never ask.
Yep.
Now, if you're feeling like I'm talking too technical, or if you're feeling like I didn't cover something and I stop and ask that question, you're going to say, everything's really good so far, Al, but by the way, I don't really care about the energy efficiency of the glass. I just want the wood on the inside of the window. Great. Now I know to stop talking about the energy efficiency, and now you told me how to sell you. So that's number 1. Always be checking in on your customer. And number 2, again, we're not talking rocket science here, but sales reps don't do it. Ask open-ended questions. Stop asking closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are conversation killers. I have a couple of acronyms that help people remind them to ask open-ended questions. And when salespeople don't do that, the conversation ends. I'll give you a very quick example. The most common open-ended question that every sales rep asks since the history of time is, do you have any questions? How do 99% of people answer that question? Scott, do you have any questions?
No,
I'm good. Right? It's a knee-jerk reaction from the brain. I don't have any questions. You know how you change that to an open-ended question? Scott, what questions do you have? It's very simple.
Yep.
Now I've forced you to think about, even if you don't have any questions, you're like, no, I'm actually good. I don't have any questions. Go on. But I made you think for a second, do I actually have any questions? And I gave you permission to ask one. So those 2 things will eliminate 90% of objections right there.
We're birds of the same feather, and I know I'm complimenting myself up to your level, but I always said I used to thought I was really good because I had all my rebuttals to my objections, and I had them memorized, and I had them down, and that was really good. But then one day, and I don't know how I heard it or where it came, but this was still within the first few years of my career. So for the first few years, I was winning by brute force because I knew all my rebuttals and I was ready for every objection. But then I realized if I owned the objection first, then it was mine. And so the process of owning the objection was to call it out in the beginning and to ask those questions, to do that discovery. Because if I knew on every single consultation, somebody's going to say something about the price or their spouse when this scenario existed, why don't I own that objection up front throughout the process? So that way I can address it and instead of waiting for it to kamikaze my deal at the end. And so that's why I said, I don't want to be good at rebuttals. I just want to own all the objections.
Yeah. And you'll find out, like I always say, even though I don't like the word closing, it's the common word, and it's the most popular word in sales. And I always say closing is not a destination. It's not a place to arrive. People are like, I got to get to a close. A close is simply the extension of a great conversation.
Amen.
If you ask the right questions and you check in on your customer and they're feeling like that you understand them and you've listened to them, at the very end, you're basically like, so when can I get you on the calendar? That's literally, there's no, would you like to go ahead with this? Is this the product you'd like to see in your home? Those stupid, ridiculous, sales questions that people ask, you simply at the end of the conversation, so when can we get started? That's it. And they should say, this sounds great. Let's do it. It's the end of a conversation rather than a closing destination.
It's funny because when you're new in sales, a lot of times you can be successful in sales off of pure emotion and energy. And, you don't have the sales skills and sales tactics. And so sometimes I'll see newbies come in and they'll rocket ship and then they'll start learning too much and then they'll tank down. And then you got to get them past that lull. It's like, and then I remember one time in sales, her name was Ann Gorman, tremendous saleswoman. But she was a director. But every time she came to the table or I was at her table, she was always brand new. And so she always acted brand new, and that had its own strategy behind it, which I thought was unique. But it's that conversation where, like you said, it's a natural progression. You don't have to ask for the business when it's just the natural conclusion of a well-done sales cycle. Yeah. And that's a true close, is you've addressed it throughout, you've answered, you've isolated, you've had good quality conversations, you found their needs, you have their solutions. It makes sense. Then, of course, you ask for their business then and there. So it is, like you said, it's just a natural flow to a well-executed presentation.
I would, when I didn't make a sale, going back to my window days, because that's where I spent many years, if I got anything other than, I just can't afford it, like they felt bad, like they wanted the product, like I just can't afford $40,000, I'm good. I'm like, okay, I understand it. But if I got to think about it, or I'm going to have 2 other window companies out, I screwed up somewhere, because that should never happen. But when I got in a genuine, like, disappointed look, like, oh my God, I want to get these, I just can't afford it, I'm like, that's okay. They're not for everyone, and that's totally fine. And I was happy with that. And so there are going to be people that don't buy from you. But if they don't buy from you, it should be for real reasons, not reasons like you didn't ask enough questions, or they got to talk to someone else, or they got to think about it. That's not a real reason. They're just saying that because that's the knee-jerk reaction of, no, I don't have a question, or the mentality or the way the brain works. When we walk into a store and someone says, can I help you? The first thing out of our mouth is, just looking, all set.
Yep.
We don't even know, we might even need help. It's the same thing. If you get to the end of a sales conversation and they say, I got to think about it, you miss something big along the line.
One of my original trainers, he had this little fake thermometers, and one was always at 100 and one was at 0. And so he used to help me understand, like, hey, as soon as you shake their hand, like wherever you start in your sales cycle, you're at 100% sales resistance. You got to get that sales resistance down, and then now bringing up the temperature of your sales acceptance. And even though, like, today we probably wouldn't say, like, put them through that sales cycle, but it's naturally what it is. They're coming into us with so much baggage, and they have so many preconceived notions, and you're just some guy who's going to come into my house like this last guy, and you're this person. Yep. And through those quality conversations, we have to reduce that and then start to build acceptance. And I don't think quality conversations happen without quality questions. So let's talk about discovery for a second. Mm-hmm. How are you helping people to understand and appreciate, the power of a well-executed discovery? Well,
I train open-ended questions with a couple of acronyms that I talked about, or that I mentioned before. And I literally have, so one of the acronyms is called TIDES, TIDES. And I'll give you an example. The T means tell me more. You can use that question or that statement almost in any conversation. Someone tells you, why they called you, and they tell you the problem. Instead of saying, great, here's my solution, because that's number one, is most salespeople sell too fast. As soon as they hear the problem, they start selling. Instead of selling, you say, well, tell me more about that, Scott.
Yeah.
And then they answer, and then the I would be, in what ways? Well, in what ways has that affected the bottom line of your business? Now they're talking. You've just asked 2 questions that 90% of the other sales rep that person talked to has never asked. And now they feel comfortable with you, and they feel like you understand them, and now they start to trust you. And then D is describe for me, and then you fill in the blank. So it's again, this is not rocket science, but when you spend time asking questions like this, you are now the anti-salesperson. You're not the person they were expecting. Now they feel like, wow, this guy has listened to me. He understands me. And then at one point, they're going to invite you to sell them.
Yep.
I call it, there's two sales islands. In every sales conversation takes place on two islands. The first island is ask, listen, and understand island. And the second island is sell me island. But there's a bridge between two islands with a draw arm on it. And the only person that will raise that arm and say, come on over to sell me island is the customer. And they will not raise that arm until they're ready for you to sell them. And the only way they're going to get there is if you ask enough questions.
Yeah. I love that. I'm going to have my team listen to this. At the end of our script, we have a script, a wireframe script that we use. This is more fronting than closing, but or acquisition, if you will. But so on the last page, what I added this quarter was something I had never done before, but it was something that when I was reading the scripts, when I would do training in front of the room, I would always manipulate and change various words. But they were sales, really like sizzly words. So I gave them like 50 like power words, and then it kind of explained why, agreement versus contract, et cetera, the basics, but still everybody needs to know. And then I did a list of really good probing questions. But then I said, you know what? Shit, this is 2024. GPT exists. GPT, take these probing questions and tell me, act as if you're the world's best sales author and this and this and this. And one of the words it came back with was story. I said, damn, I've never used that before. I've literally never asked the customer, tell me the story about the condition of your property. I've always said, just tell me a little bit more. But that word story is such a phenomenal way to open up. And I said, man, I couldn't even imagine what that one little word would have done financially if I would have heard that word. And so it's just the power of those little nuances when asking those probing questions.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, you can put that into any industry. Tell me the story of why you called me. Tell me the story of the problems you're having instead of just saying, tell me the problems you're having. That's a great, I love that. That's good.
I saw it too. I said, damn, this is a good one. That's a good job, GPT. One last technical thing. So third-party stories are important, right? A third-party story to me is a way to help the customer see maybe a decision or problem through somebody else's eyes, that I can share with them the outcome that they received. And somebody just like you just went through the similar situation. Sometimes it's a great way to own the objection. At first, they were thinking about this might be the issue, but then they later resolved. And so third-party stories are I think, a powerful part of sales. When you go to a lot of sales organizations, nobody knows, at least me, teams, I see nobody really knows third-party stories per se, or they're not using them at that scale. And if you've kind of seen similar things, how are you helping them to craft an authentic third-party story in advance so where it feels authentic or isolating the conversation sounds more fluid so they can actually use third-party stories?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the older term is social proof. You call it third party, you call it whatever you want, but social proof is one of the 7 pillars of persuasion and influence that Robert Cialdini came up with, which is a great book, by the way.
Yes.
Social proof is we are pack animals. Human beings are pack animals, going back to how the brain works. We like to do things other people like us have done. So third party has to be relevant to you. You can't say a 85-year-old overweight woman in Wisconsin just bought the same product. That has nothing to do with me. But I trained this kid he was about 24. He sold suits in one of those warehouse places, those men's warehouse places. And we said, let's use social proof to get your sales up. And someone would walk in and they would say, hey, Scott, what are you here for? And he would say, I need a suit for a wedding. Great. You know, guys who look just like you, same height, same stature, bought one of these 3 suits over here. Boom. Social proof took you over there. He would sell the suit almost 100% of the time. So that's social proof. When you put it into a story format, it's very simple. You want to, there's a structure to it. Like, okay, you know what, Scott? A company just like yours was having a very similar problem, and they contacted us to take a look at it, and this is what we did. And then you just kind of say, but it was just like us. They made this decision to do this, and this really worked out. So you come up with the success at the end of the story, and now you're putting them in a position of imagining what it's like to have the problem solved by someone similar to them who solved the same problem. And if you can do that in a story format, you're going to come across as very conversational, not selling, and they're going to feel much more comfortable doing business with you.
I could go deep down this rabbit hole. I won't for the sake of time, but I wanted to thank you because I think what you just did for me by correlating my old school late 90s or whatever it was, or early 2000s version of third party story to train these kids better on it really means nothing to these kids, but like the social proof story, they'll connect with that and with the exact same subject matter. And, but when my original sales managers, he would come and tell me something, or I would have my girlfriend at that time when I was a really young man just tell me, I was like, I need you to tell me that I changed your life, whatever it may be. I changed your life. Meeting me was the best thing to happen. You can't wait to travel more with your family or do whatever. So that way with conviction, whatever my manager had just said, or that next day I could be like, I talked to a young lady yesterday who was one of the happiest, most pleasant conversations. And she did this because I wanted to make sure my third party story still was truthful. It wasn't just completely fabricated. I needed something in it other than just, because they would give you these pre-designed third-party scripts. And I'd be like, well, at least read it to me so that way I can say this girl, she was wearing a blue shirt, just like I needed it. I needed it to take it to the next level. I want to ask you a couple of last little questions, my man, and then figure out how we can all follow you. This has been a really good quality conversation. Burnout and increased retention, I assume that has a lot to do with the sales culture. Yeah. Is there any other things that people are like, dude, I've been doing sales for a long time and I'm done. I haven't had my best year was 5 years ago and they're watching this. Like what's some advice to keep them in the game?
Yeah. I mean, that I think that goes back to life in general. I mean, you can, if you're kind of going through the motions, you gotta do some self-awareness. You got to do some self-evaluation. Look, sit down and do an assessment of yourself. Write down the things that you really like about yourself and things you do good. And then the next column, write down what you want to improve on and where you want to go and set some goals. And if you're in an organization that is burning you out or the management's making you burn out, then you might have to look for a better organization or a better culture. Nothing matters unless you're happy, man. It really doesn't. You just got to be happy with your life. And I always say, I did a podcast once and the guy asked me a very similar question and I answered him. I said, you got to find what makes your heart sing. If you're in sales and you're enjoying it, but you want to do something on the side that's a hobby that makes your heart sing, you'll be a happier person, because if you're happier, you'll sell better too. People don't want to buy stuff from people who are depressed or just kind of going through the motion. So.
Yeah, a lot of times people, I think, get in a feedback loop too, where I think Zig Ziglar, somebody said it's like a sales rut is a grave with both ends knocked out or something like that. Mm-hmm. It's like you can get stuck in one of these things and you really got to be proactive to pull yourself out, because what happens I noticed is people have a bad month. And if they don't like their home life and their personal life, like you said, their personality and their attitude, and they're leaving yesterday, what ends up happening is they have commission breath. Yeah. And then they start that feedback loop where they're no longer having authentic conversations, and the sellers or the customers, can feel it. And you lose the opportunity to pull yourself out because you're really self-sabotaging to a degree that hopefully a manager can isolate and see and just say, dude, let's stand up. Let's stand up while you're on the phone with these people. Let's shake it out a little bit. Let's do those types of things. Yeah.
I think it matters. The other thing that you reminded when you said Zig and to get you out of a rut, what gets you out of a rut is when you start helping people.
Amen.
Like once a day, help somebody with something. Zig said, one of my favorite quotes of his was, you will always get in life what you want if you help other people get what they want. Amen. And if you just do something nice for somebody that you don't expect anything back, you'll be amazed at what that does to you just feel like a better person. And you don't want to do anything and expect anything back. You don't want to make a donation and then post it on social media. I hate when people do that. Like do something genuinely nice for people and you'll get out of a rut very quickly.
I think that you embody that and you teach that. And I don't want to go too much into your secret sauce, but one of the things I really loved about your sales style, and the reason why people need to go to the 7secretsalesacademy.com, and the reason why you got to catch this book is because you talk about the difference between the helping percentage versus the closing percentage.
Yeah.
And that feeds off of exactly what you said. When you're here to help people, the sales part happens.
happens,
And
right?
if you gauge yourself by that KPI, it's the best KPI to gauge yourself at as a professional communicator.
Couldn't agree more.
All right. I should have ended it with that one, but I want to ask you a question about AI. So let's
Okay.
talk AI real quick. How do you see, Allan, our game, your game, everybody's game really genuinely being impacted in the short term, let's say maybe 6 to 12 months? And then what do you see for this a year from now? I mean, a year or two from now.
Well, the AI world is right now, I think the pendulum is over here where it's impacting on a negative as far as all the bot messages and the things that are going out from on LinkedIn and emails
Yep.
and everything. There's so much of that. I think eventually it'll start to swing back and kind of even out, because there's still going to be a million things that need to be sold face to face.
Amen.
Now, obviously, you can go on Amazon, you can go on websites, you can buy all of that stuff and never speak to a person. That's what you can do. But when you have to talk to a person, that's still going to exist as long as people exist. There are AI bots that can have a conversation with you. Have you seen these? The conversation, and some of these bots are actually the real people on the other end are buying products without speaking to a human being, but they're speaking to a robot. So I think right now it's in the negative area. I think we'll find a leveling place, because as long as we're alive as humans, you're going to have to sell face to face at some point, and that's not going away. So I'm not really worried about it. But they're also, on the positive end, there are ways to use AI, like you just mentioned. You went on ChatGPT and found, tell me the story. That's helpful. If you use AI the right way, it can help with your sales. But it's not a substitute for it. It's just another tool.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's going to have a substantial impact, and to different segments, to different industries, more than others. It's going to happen in lead generation, probably a high side, and closing lower side, or that'll be the longest tail to get there. But I think it's if something's going to gobble you up, you can either join it or you can wait to be gobbled up. And I think leveraging that and saying, hey, here's my nurture sequences that I normally have in my CRM drip campaigns. Let me take that. Let me use this AI to enhance those and the verbiage. Or, hey, let me just keep track of my daily performances and what's happening on the sales side or marketing channels. I think it's a tremendous asset to those who are in sales to enhance themselves. It's like, hey, I'm better because I have access to all this stuff in my phone, but now I'm taking it to a whole nother level. And so I'm really excited about, for me, and I'm in one of those industries that should be cannibalized from it. I have a 180 person call center here right outside of this doors. It will make an impact, but I'm going to leverage that to do the cannibalizing of the other guys who are afraid to leverage it or are slow to leverage it, while improving the experience of my agents here, because I want them to learn. What I tell them is these aren't just sales skills. These are life skills. These are communication skills. The fact that you can be in a situation, whether good or bad or life-threatening, and you have the ability to genuinely, potentially talk your way out of a bad situation, or stop your friend from doing something really bad because you know how to communicate and you know how to ask real questions. Being in sales, I think, is one of the most powerful things that you can do that feed into so many other parts of your life.
I couldn't agree more. Like, quite often when I'm doing a training, especially communications training, and I do a whole training on eliminating negative words and writing proper emails, but more often than not, it bleeds into personal lives as well. Like, oh, wow, I can talk to my kid when he gets home from school using these strategies and using these techniques. So proper communication is one of the best. I mean, if you don't know how to communicate, you're gonna struggle in your life, no matter what you do.
I want to leave you with this, because your title of your book, 7 Secrets to Selling More by Selling Less. It reminded me of a quote, a president. I really wish I should have prepared more, but there was a president, I don't know if it was Washington or Franklin, one of these early presidents, and he had written his friend a letter, and he said, at the end of it, he said, if I would have had, I apologize for the length of this letter. If I would have had more time, it would have been shorter. I said, oh, wow.
That's brilliant.
People overtalk in sales, and they overdo it. And so that's what made me think, like, selling more by selling less. Like, you don't need a lot of words to sell more. you can sell more by selling less, by doing that less. And so that's what your title of your book reminded me of. And I just thought you might connect with it.
Yeah, I love that. And even like the email training I do is like, I put up 10 phrases that most people use in emails that completely can be eliminated. You know, like, I hope this email finds you well. Like, how ridiculous of a sentence is that? Stuff like that. So we
that's the ones the Nigerians use still when they're trying to tell me about my money that the prince left.
Yeah, we overtalk, we overdo things as humans, and especially in sales. So,
cool.
Talk less, listen more, man.
Yep. That 2 ears, 1 mouth. Use it in that proportion. Yep. Allan, how do we find you, bud?
Just go to the 7secretsalesacademy.com. That has all my stuff. There's a link there for my book, but if you just want to go on Amazon and type in my name, Allan with 2 L's and an A, my book will come up. It's in hard copy, it's in Kindle, and it's also an audio book that I read myself.
Cool, man. All right, dude. I'm super proud to have had you on today. It's been a great conversation. I thank you so much, and we look forward to following you. I'll be sending out this to everybody in my group, man. I want them to follow you. I want them to get your perspective of this 20-some years of sales and sales training. So I dig it, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Hey, Scott, tell me more on how I can come in and do a workshop for your team. I'm just kidding.
Do you know where I'm at? Do you know where I'm located at?
No, I don't.
Colombia, South America. You come down anytime, buddy.
Oh, wow. I definitely want to come down now.
Yeah. We got a 12,000 square foot state-of-the-art call center. And yeah, man, we got something special. But I believe in everything what you're saying. I know you're kind of saying a little bit unjust, but that growth, that's like, you can never stop feeding yourself. And so, yeah, man, awesome. I appreciate it. And I love watching I just found out the journey, but we love watching it. And we talked about it. I showed it to my sales directors. And anyways, dude, we're super excited to consider your family now. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Scott.
Talk to you, brother.